My name is Flo Fu. I'm a musician, director. I love aviation so much. People started to call me Airflow.
Hi Airflow! I just finished a banquet over with the Ultralights and I just won the Pilot of the Year award. Yay! Thank you. We had a grass strip in our backyard and it was in our community. No one else really used it except one other person, and so we kind of had it to ourselves for practicing. So I would hop in here and I would just go back and forth, and then after that, after I was getting good at controlling it and going straight in the middle of the runway, I started picking up my wheel. So there's this whole process of me going back and forth on the runway in order for me to get down all the like necessary things that had to be kind of like second nature. So for example, controlling the rudders, making sure I stay in the middle of the runway was second nature, and then also being able to control the airplane while my nose is in the air. So after it was just back and forth, like, I don't know, for multiple days. Then we increased the speed, and then I was doing a wheelie on my back wheels with my nose in the air. During this time, when I was putting my nose in the air, there was a time when I started climbing, and I didn't know what to do. So I lowered power, I went down, and near the ground, about 10 feet above the ground, I stalled, and I landed on this wheel. And it bent a little bit, and we had to change it, but then everything was fine after that. So that was kind of like my, okay, I have to focus a little bit more in order for this to work. So after I got the wheelies down, we tried getting the airplane to come off the ground a little bit and then come back down. So it was just kind of like a few little bumps because our grass runways are a little bit bumpy, so you would just kind of bump up over the ground. After I got good at controlling that, I then moved to taking off a little bit, cruising, and coming back down. And I was only 5 feet above the ground when I was doing that. So there was constant steps that I had to make second nature, so taking off and landing wasn't a problem when I did my solo. After doing those little tiny hops, I got higher and higher, and then to the point where it was like taking off, leveling out. They're a really cool airplane. So what they do actually is they're going as slow as they can with all the throttle they can to make it as loud as possible. So they're doing all of that on purpose. So sometimes you'll see them tilted up and going really slowly. That's just so they can make really a bunch of noise. So like that. This is one of the big steps that I'm going to have on my way to becoming an Air Force pilot and getting my private pilot's license. And I think one of the reasons we picked this plane as like the step before getting my pilot's license and learning how to fly in a regular aircraft is because it's the closest to a normal airplane. So it has a regular yoke, the brakes are a little bit different, and it has the rudders, and everything is the same. Unlike after that, I would go to the Air Force so I can be a pilot there, and then eventually do something that will benefit my country. June 8th of this year.
This year?
Yes.
Wow! You are a new pilot.
I am a new pilot. After my solo, it was just a bunch of practice after then. There was just more taking off and landing and taking off and landing and just coming around it. So June 8th was when I did my solo, and I was very nervous and stiff, and I was keeping everything perfect to make sure everything went fine. Like my airspeed was 50 exactly, I was at exactly 1,000 feet, I was doing everything I was very tight, you know.
You are really doing well, you're building your altitudes and making your turns, and you're just making great matters. Really good job.
Thank you. running into some problems where it would get too hot, but I just had to, when I would go to a really low setting, or there was just kind of like a peak. If you were at a really low setting, it was fine, it didn't get hot, but then once you got up to like here, it got hotter, but then when you got more full throttle, then it went lower. It's kind of like reverse, like you would wonder why is more throttle cooler and less throttle hotter. And it stays on most of the time, or the whole time, and it shows me my cylinder temperatures. So the cylinder temperatures never really change too much unless like the weather around it changes. So sometimes it would get colder or actually hotter as we go up north, and then when I'm in South Carolina it was typically cooler. So that was pretty much what I used to determine my temperatures. And then there's a lot of other things that we added on, like for my I added this airspeed indicator, and I'm typically at 50 miles an hour. And if I nose down, or if I'm going somewhere around 60, my windshield will start to buckle in a little bit. So that's like my airplane telling me, you're going too fast, I don't like it. So, and if you're going too slow, it'll kind of like billow out of it, and then you'll feel like wind coming into your cockpit. And that's another sign of saying you're going to stall, nose down, before you get to an unsavable point. I could call my dad, and he would call me every 10 minutes or so he could see how I was, what I was doing, and to make sure those temperatures were okay. And if the temperatures weren't okay, or they were going like haywire, then I would have to land. Fortunately, that never happened.
So she does this every day, every morning and night?
Yeah, once in the morning and once in the evening. So she goes out, takes off, and then she flies around, lands, taxis back, takes off again, and does that over and over again.
Did you wear your pilot suit when you fly?
I don't have a pilot suit, but I did have this one black jacket that was kind of fitted, so I could still move around. When I was flying, I had this kind of like wristband that would like had like notes about like the runways, where I was coming from, what I needed to say, the weather, the Unicom, so I could talk to other aircrafts. So I prepared those cards in advance, and I would switch them out and put them in, so I could go from airport to airport. Is that we'll put like GoPro somewhere around the airplane so we can capture how I'm flying. So typically I'll sit right here so you can get a good angle, and we put it in multiple places, from in front of me, on top of me, on the wing, the tail, or right now right behind me. We also put it on the wheel once, and that got like a good got a good video of me taking off and landing, but very close to the ground. So a lot of it was kind of like a documentation of how I was flying. And in the videos, you can see how I became like a better pilot, because in the beginning, turbulence was very hard for me to control, and you would see me like all worried, and like I would be very had a lot of big movements, and the airplane would move around a lot. But as I went through the trip, it got less turbulent, or in my standard, I was better at controlling turbulence, so it was less, and I could fly in more turbulence, and that's one of the things that let me get here so early. Because if I just never flew when it was sort of windy outside, then I would have never been able to get here this early.
Think about right now.
Every time I did a call, so that wind wasn't bothering my mic, and my engine, since right behind me, was also part of the problem. I took back my throttle and started descending, made my crawl quickly, and sometimes I had to cover my microphone. And then that's what allowed other people to hear me. So that's one of the things I had to figure out on my own. And instead of other people having to like ask me to repeat myself like a billion times before they understand what I'm saying.
What do you use for navigation?
So for navigation, I use this Garmin 196. It's connected to the battery here, or there's a battery in here where all the wires are. This is kind of like the electronics section, and so that's what told me my altitude. That's what helped me and showed me my heading, and I just followed that heading the whole time. And there was also an option to like move out so I could see my path and where I was going. So most of the time it was just a straight line. None of it was like curvy or anything. So most going back to like 40 miles or 60 miles, I either had like 40-minute flights or an hour and something minute flights. And my longest flight I think was an hour and 35 minutes. And in this thing, it's sometimes you're just like, it's like at some point you feel like falling asleep because of how long you're just sitting there, and your legs start to get a little bit numb because this whole thing is vibrating like subtly, and so it goes back to like when my legs started feeling a little bit numb when I was tense. So being in the airplane for too long is also not too good, because then it's kind of like sitting down for too long. When you get up, you're like, ugh.
Then we moved to South Carolina, and then it was 1,000 miles, and we had to do 41 hops.
So you pick her up like in the airport for food?
I sometimes bring her like a sandwich or something, but it's pretty much she stops, waits for me to get there. I fuel her up, and she goes. You know, it's not a lot of downtime. And when the weather gets too bad, we'll stop for lunch and go eat lunch, and then maybe do a couple more flights in the afternoon if the weather's good. But we keep flying as long as the weather was good. Some days we got 10 hops in, some days only 8, and one day we only had 2 because the weather was a bit windy. But now that I see her flying now, she's much better with the crosswinds, and so I think we could have gone then had she had the skills that she has now. So she's developing as a pilot pretty quickly.
She's a new pilot. She got her solo flight on June 8th.
That's right.
Yeah, as a dad, how do you feel about this flight all the way from home to Oshkosh, 6 days?
As you can imagine, it's quite a bunch of mixed feelings. One of pride and happiness, and love for my daughter, and also fear and anxiety that she ends up in the woods someplace, and that I have to go and get her. So it's a bundle of emotions that are all playing out at the same time. So that's how I felt.
My dad has been supporting me a lot, and I don't think I would be able to do this trip without him. My mom has always been a little bit nervous with me flying, but she always says that I was a better pilot than my brother was, because sometimes we fly together in like a regular airplane, and then when I took control, I had a smoother flight than my brother would, because he'd be like, and like my mom gets very like plane sick quickly, so she has to. You can't be doing very like steep turns or anything, because then she'll get like worried. So I've also had a lot of support with friends, and I've been sending like pictures and saying, oh, look at me flying. Like for the first time when I flew, or the first time I got off the ground, just a little bit, I had support from everybody, and I feel like that motivation is one of the things that also helped me continue with this trip, because it showed that there was other people out there rooting for me. And when I went from airport to airport, there was typically always someone who came out to me, asked me about my airplane and my trip, and they were always very supportive of me and of the whole thing. And they always did as much as they could. So they would like give me water, or they would let me go inside where the AC was, or they'd put my plane in a hangar so it could stay out of the sun and not get like too hot, because that seat is black and it can get very like, it attracts sun. So when I sit in it, so it didn't get really hot. Actually, there were some people who would help me clean my windshield because they thought it was too dirty. So there was plenty of people who helped me during my journey, and I feel like they were a major part in my success.
You made it pretty long that last time. What was the?
I was focused on trying to get trying to get a good proper crosswind that I forgot to all of
One way is yellow, one way is blue. It's kind of like a Ukraine flag.
So originally my dad wanted it pick the blue and yellow for the Ukrainian flag. My mom's half Ukrainian and I'm a fourth Ukrainian. But in all honesty, they're my two favorite colors.
Come see a bud, usually the young one.
She's always trusting me more than I deserve, so I try to live up to that trust.
You're a good dad.
Well, maybe in this case, but I have my moments when I'm not such a good dad, so I try to balance it out.
So what kind of airport do you stop?
We typically stop at airports that aren't like Oshkosh. They're not very busy, and there's no tower, so I can come in, and if no one hears me, or if it's mainly like visual at that point, you have to look around to see if there's any airplanes. So it was an easier thing to go from airport to airport, because I didn't have to worry about communicating excessively in order to land at an airport. So when I first went to Oshkosh, like this airport, it was my first tower airport, so it was a little bit nerve-wracking to go through, since I had never done the communication process. And I think down in Fond du Lac, like the airport closest here, when I was getting ready to take off, I was like so scared, and I just took off. But later in the flight is when I realized that something was off, and I was doing my normal thing where I was throttling back, and so I could hear myself, and the people around me could hear me, and that's when I heard something wrong with the engine. So our muffler didn't like cleanly came apart, and it started making a lot of noise, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want this thing to blow up on me. So it added on to the nerve of me going into my first tower airport, along with the sound of this engine going crazy behind me. So because the muffler had broke, we had to get it welded, and thankfully there was someone.
Project First Flight.
Yeah, Project First Flight it was like a glider, I think, right over there, the one with the white fabric. I think they even made a pig fly or something. Like they strapped a pig into the seat and they flew him up in the air. So pigs really do fly now, I guess.
Let's start wheeling our way out there.
Okay. So eventually I got on the ground and everything was fine. The engine didn't blow up or anything. So we fixed it with the Project First Flight. He was a welder, because I think they made that themselves. It was kind of like a Quicksilver that was turned into something else. And then that's when I could continue flying here. So when I was first coming in, I taxied in the wrong area. The person who was supposed to guide me to this spot right here couldn't find me, because I turned a little bit too early. So that's what made me even more nervous. So this last flight was probably my most nerve-wracking flight. And when I turned off, there was a really, really big group of people that came to congratulate me, but it just overwhelmed me even more, because I was like, So, yeah, it was a very eventful trip that I had to go through. and there was a lot of like ups and downs and moments where I felt like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this, and moments where I had a lot of confidence. And one thing I had to tell myself is that I had to be very perseverant. I was very independent, and I was in control of the aircraft. So I gained a sense of responsibility, and it was mostly like through the flight. I felt more like an adult in some ways, because it was all me. I'm the only person in the plane, and if I wanted to, I could fly to Miami if I wanted to. No one would know. So, I mean, other than you probably know, because I had a little tracker hanging in the front, and you could see where I was going every 2 minutes. It told me, but I gained a certain sense of independence. But in order for all this to work, I had to have that perseverance that I was talking about. It's not one of those things where you just kind of hope and then you eventually get what you were hoping for. Like, let's say you're going down a water slide and you're really scared of the water slide, and you go down and you're perfectly fine. That doesn't really require any hard work, so it's much different. And I had to tell myself, I have to really want to do this. So I had to wake up early in the morning to get the best weather, fly as much as I could to get as much practice as I could, and I had to kind of like take charge. So my message is that if you want to achieve something, or if you want to fly, or if there's something that you think is difficult, it's going to be difficult if you don't do your best, or you don't give it your all, because there's some things that can't just be handed to you. There's some things that you have to fight for, or that you have to really, really want it in order for it to actually happen.